This is why if you inhibit 5-alpha reductase, nandrolone actually becomes very androgenic and not hair safe, because the parent hormone itself has a very high binding affinity with a significant amount of androgenicity. What's up guys, Derek, moreplaysmartdays.com. Today we're going to be talking about topical nandrolone instead of injectable, obviously, which is the format of administration most are familiar with. So this is something that came to my attention recently, indirectly, just as I was looking through the available medications list of some of the compounding pharmacies that we fill our prescriptions through for my HRT clinic. And I saw topical nandrolone and I was like, wow, this is unique. And I was like, who the hell would this be useful for? Until I started to dig into it a bit more. And it's kind of, to me, it's really interesting. And for some of you who have this, like if you're watching my channel, higher likelihood is you either are interested in hair loss prevention content or bodybuilding pharmacology or health optimization in some capacity or something along those lines. And obviously there's, dating content and stuff, but largely my content boils down to that stuff. And the thing with nandrolone is it's one of the most hair safe anabolics there is by far, when 5-alpha reductase isn't inhibited, of course. So if you haven't seen my video on don't combine finasteride, dutasteride with nandrolone, I recommend you go watch that if you don't know what I'm talking about. But anyways, as far as the efficacy of topical nandrolone, to me this is really interesting, because if you've seen my topical finasteride video, you'll know that I discuss the potential it has in regards to disproportionately leveraging 5-alpha reductase enzyme tissue concentration. So when you have topical testosterone, for example, and guys on HRT apply it to their scrotum, you get a disproportionate rise in DHT relative to what you would otherwise get with the same amount of testosterone being injected. So the reason being is because the skin, and particularly that area, is so dense in 5-alpha reductase enzymes that there's a disproportionate 5-alpha reduction of testosterone into DHT, which then introduces more DHT than would otherwise occur into the bloodstream via just the tissue specific activity. At the end of the day, you're still getting testosterone into your system, but the actual application site, what kind of stuff is in that local space, actually can determine exactly what happens to the drug metabolism wise in a disproportionate manner. So it's well documented in the literature, as well as anecdotally, there's tons of blood work to support this, that DHT rises more with scrotal application of testosterone than via, in relative terms, the same amount of testosterone injected. And then I hypothesized in my finasteride video, the topical one, that we could leverage the opposite of this in the scalp. So if the scalp is dense in 5-alpha reductase enzyme activity 2, you could theoretically apply finasteride on your scalp and get a compounding level of protection via this disproportionate activity at 5-AR via anything that interacts with it. So more so than other areas of the body, we obviously know the scalp is very, very affected by 5-AR, which is the whole reason we would use an inhibitor to begin with. So if you use something topically with a low enough molecular weight to get in there, like finasteride, or dutasteride potentially, which is another topic for another time, you can disproportionately inhibit potentially the creation of DHT in the scalp tissue itself. So how does this all tie into nandrolone? Well, the molecular weight of nandrolone is not that much different than testosterone. So in theory, if you have something with a molecular weight, I'm not really going to get into the 500 Dalton rule, but like in general, the first thing most people will do to check if a topical could be efficacious is look at the molecular weight, and they'll see, okay, is it under 500 Daltons? Okay, it is, which nandrolone is, as well as testosterone. So, this is something we might be able to leverage in a topical context. Now, when you apply nandrolone or you inject it, what happens? It 5-alpha reduces into a metabolite known as dihydronandrolone, which has a multiple-fold lower androgenicity than the parent hormone nandrolone. This is why if you inhibit 5-alpha reductase, nandrolone actually becomes very androgenic and not hair safe, because the parent hormone itself has a very high binding affinity with a significant amount of androgenicity. But when you don't inhibit 5-AR, what happens is when nandrolone gets into the areas dense with 5-AR enzymatic activity, if 5-alpha reduces into this much less androgenic metabolite, So in muscle tissue where there's not a whole lot of 5-AR activity, it stays as nandrolone essentially and builds a shit ton of muscle and, exerts all the benefits you want. But then in the scalp, in, the areas dense with 5-AR, 5-alpha reduces significantly to dihydronandrolone, which then doesn't have that good of a binding affinity for AR. So it's very easy to, not only is it not that brutal in a hair loss context, but also it's very easy to compete with topically with an anti-androgen, a topical anti-androgen like RU, CB, etc. And then on top of that too, it's inherent progestogenic activity that can upregulate aromatase enzyme activity and all this other stuff that can have an anti-androgenic effect in the scalp itself potentially, all compounds to equate to this more efficacious hormone in a hair loss context. Now there are other compounds that are, like hair safe relative to testosterone on paper, and in practical application, they're few and far between, but there are some. But nandrolone in particular is well documented, well studied, high levels of tolerability, lots of human data to back it. All of the really fucked up outcomes come from rodent data pretty much. And with that being said, obviously there is some like stuff that's come out of the woodwork that has shown that nandrolone is a bit probably not the best monotherapy option, and I've discussed its limitations. I shouldn't have even said that it's implied that it's side effect free, because I'm the one who made all the videos explaining how it doesn't have enough inherent estrogenic activity to support physiological functions that are necessary. So kind of like take that with a grain of salt, but it's a well documented hormone with a lot of clinical data behind it, and we know what to expect from it a lot of the time, and it's quite predictable. And especially if you factor in the fact that we're quite aware that the majority of its pitfalls sort of come from this lack of aromatization to estradiol and some of the kind of ways you can circumvent that potentially. But anyways, to me this is really interesting because hypothetically, even more so than injecting the nandrolone, you could topically apply it and disproportionately increase the amount of dihydronandrolone you create in the scalp via leveraging this localized tissue activity of enzymes. So you have this 5-alpha reduction to DHN in areas that are more dense in it than you would otherwise get by injecting nandrolone by topically applying it. So to me, this makes it really interesting because it potentially even introduces a scenario where nandrolone is even more hair safe than it would otherwise be injecting it. And when it's injected, it's already one of the most hair safe compounds there is. So if you can topically apply it and leverage this to an even greater extent, who knows, how much promise it has. With that being said, you're limited to how much absorption you can get out of it and whatnot, and, scalp porosity and different, absorption obstacles you have to take into account. But, just putting the theory on the table, I think is really interesting and should be explored further. So that is the takeaway from that. So I'd be interested to see what, who gets prescribed this, but it's on our medications list apparently. So that is interesting. So anyways, if you want to check out anything I'm associated with and support the channel, check it out in the video description below. My TRT clinic, Gorilla Mind, Gorilla Mode, my turnkey pre-workout and nootropic formulas. If you want to get blood work, any of my like pre-designed panels are linked in the description below. The diet model I recommend for newbies to at least try out for building muscle and learning how to hit all their micronutrient allotments as well as while simultaneously hitting their macronutrient allotments in a efficient manner. Anything else I'm associated with, video description below. You can follow me too on Instagram at moreplates_more_dates, Facebook, Snapchat, BitChute, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts. Comment helps the algorithm here. Like, subscribe. Talk to you guys soon.